Welcome back. Let's get started on True Crime Convos tonight. We have a little bit of a different, case for programming. It's not very often that I will cover cases that kind of touch on political figures or anything like that. So it's always a little bit fun to hit those hit those topics every now and then. So tonight we are going to be talking about Oliver Billy Sipple, and then if we have time, I'll also touch on, for those who watch like Bravo and know the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, they know that Jen Shaw has recently pled guilty in her money laundering case, her federal money laundering case. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh, it's going to be so freaking awesome. So if we have time, we'll talk about the Jen Shaw stuff, but we for sure are going to be discussing the Oliver Billy Sipple case. If you are into podcasts, I highly recommend going to the Radiolab podcast because they did a really popular episode on Oliver. And the host actually interviewed Sara Jane Moore, who is the woman who attempted to assassinate Gerald Ford. Oliver is actually the person who saved his life. So kudos to Oliver on that. As you know, we all start our show with our ASL. If you are too young to know what ASL is, why are you here? Just kidding. We're so excited to have you here. So, as y'all know, my ASL is 34-year-old cis female, she, her pronouns, going into the Dallas area. That is where I reside. And this week, I'm also going to be in LA at the Spotify studios because I am hosting the Moment House um, live stream, if you will. It's a very new platform to me, but it's super cool. We're going to be talking about a lot of things in true crime. So if you have not had it, then check it out. Lovely key. I don't know what we're talking about here. Anyhow, drop your ASL in the chat. So let's start talking about Oliver Billy Sipple. He is the person who essentially saved Gerald Ford's life. Here we go. So, another kind of problematic topic here is that we're going to kind of talk about why the press outed Billy as a gay man and how being outed affected his life and eventually contributed to his death. The sources of today's discussion, I always kind of try and mention those, but we are pulling heavily from the Washington Post article, New York Times article, different AP, and of course from Radiolab. We don't plagiarize, so if you are highly always welcome to reach out to me directly for the sources that we use to discuss any of our cases. So on November 20th, 1941, Oliver Wellington, or Billy Sipple as he's known, is born in Michigan. He is one of 8 siblings who's being raised by devout Baptist parents. Now, early in his life, Oliver realizes that he's different and he realizes that he's gay, but he has to keep that realization to himself because he knows that his Baptist parents will never accept a child that is gay, even if they love him. Now, on December 14th, 1967, Oliver enlists in the Marines and he serves in the Vietnam War as I forgot what his title or what his rank was, but he ends up being injured there twice and he gets an injury to his head. Now, one of the times that Oliver is receiving treatment, the hospital he's in is bombed. So when he returns to America, Oliver suffers from what was then known as shell shock. We know it now as PTSD. And there's, of course, variations of how PTSD affects different people. But he was suffering from that. And he becomes very emotional and starts receiving treatment at a Veterans Affairs hospital. Now, he's found to be 100% disabled due to the emotional trauma that he endured during his tour. And during all 4th of July weekends, Oliver has to actually stay in a VA hospital so that he can be away from the sounds of firecrackers and explosions. It's likely why you've seen kind of those Facebook posts going around where it says, like, people really hate fireworks because of how it affects the veterans in their life. That's still true today. So it's not surprising at all that Oliver experienced kind of the same thing. Now, on March 23rd, 1970, he's discharged from the Marines and he moves to San Francisco so he can live the life that he wants to live without upsetting his parents and the rest of his family. And I think we've seen that before for people who kind of feel like they have to be closeted, um, to kind of leave somewhere and be who they really were meant to be this whole time. We still unfortunately see that today because we know that there are people who just don't, um, recognize or support people who identify in the LGBTQ, like the alphabet mafia. So he moves to San Francisco, and when I was listening to the Radiolab podcast, San Francisco at that time when he moves in the 70s is a place where you can be out, but to the people, you know, you left behind, you can still be in. So you can be out in San Francisco, and when you go back home, nobody's the wiser. You're basically back in the closet, but you can completely reinvent yourself when you're in San Francisco. And I remember seeing things like that, especially like during the free love hippie movement. I'm a history major, like I got my degree in history, so hello. Um, you'll hear all of that, but basically like the Haight-Ashbury area was just, like, huge for that, like, people's revolution came from being able to freely express themselves, and that's why we had, like, the renaissance of the free love movement, why we had people who, were freely able to express themselves. That's exactly what Billy does when he ends up going to, San Francisco and joining the gay community there. He starts going by the name Billy. He frequents gay bars and he marches in gay parades throughout the United States, and he even joins the campaign of Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay candidates for office. I don't know if anybody else saw that movie that Sean Penn was in. He played Harvey Milk, and it was actually a really great movie. Madeline, yes, same thing. It makes me so sad on the 4th to think about the vets who are having a bad time. Milk was an incredible movie, great history too behind that, and maybe one day we'll cover the death of Harvey Milk. Now on September 22nd, 1975, 33-year-old Billy is taking a walk when he happens upon more than 3,000 people crowded around the St. Francis Hotel on San Francisco's Union Square. When Billy ends up asking, "Hey, what's going on?" people are telling him like, "Oh my gosh, we're waiting for President Gerald R. Ford to walk out of the hotel into his limo, and that limo is parked on the street." So Billy's like, "Oh, okay, well, cool. I'll wait and see what's going on." So he sits with the crowd, so he can get his chance at the president. I think anybody would do that. I don't know. Has anybody in this chat met a president or seen a president? Um, when they were president, not like when they were rallying before to become president. I don't think I have ever been in the presence of a president, a standing president. But if you have, I'd love to hear about that. Um, Anna, have you? Because you might have been thing. Oh, right. Jen Shaw. Oh my gosh, of course. So yeah, for Jen Shaw, absolutely. I don't know why these people like housewives go on TV who have all of these fraudulent issues, like living lives full of fraud. Mary Cosby, hello. Jen Shaw, hello. Teresa Giudice, like, come on, you guys. I don't know why they would do that. Okay, digressing. So let's see. Madeline said Obama used to come through Chicago and we could see the motorcade, but not him. Diana is next. Highly agree. She's probably like, honestly, Ghislaine Maxwell. I would not be surprised. The stuff with the whole Hayden Panettiere thing is also strange. So 3 hours later, President Ford ends up coming out of the hotel. The crowd is like applauding and cheering. And this is the moment that Sara Jane Moore reaches her right hand into her purse and pulls out a .38 revolver. She's aiming the gun right at Ford's head and pulls the trigger, but the bullet ends up flying a few feet to the right of Ford, hits the side of the hotel, then it ricochets and strikes a taxi driver in the groin, and he's left with a bruise. Like, how lucky are you that you're just left with a bruise after being hit by the groin, in the groin by a bullet? I don't know. So this, of course, scares the crap out of President Ford. He ends up freezing in place, and Sarah is just standing there with her hand holding the gun. And before she can take another shot, Billy ends up lunging at her, grabs the gun, and pulls it down. And he gives police enough time to basically tackle Sarah and arrest her for this attempted assassination. Now, this is the second time, unfortunately, that someone had attempted to assassinate Ford. Just 3 weeks earlier, Squeaky Fromm, and that name may sound familiar if you are familiar with true crime. She was part of the Manson family. She had pointed a gun at him while outside of Sacramento's Capitol Park. So President Ford is rushed into his limo while Sarah and Billy are taken into the hotel and questioned. So Billy, being scared of loud noises due to his PTSD, is shaking uncontrollably. You just have to imagine that he's kind of in this environment where he's not expecting like an attack of any sort. So when it happens, it automatically triggers his trauma response. And so the shaking is kind of the way that that adrenaline is leaving his body. So he tries to calm down. And the Secret Service asks, like, hey, what were you doing outside of the hotel? And Billy's like, I was just walking down the street and I saw this crowd. I didn't know, what was going on. And then everybody was saying they were waiting for the president. So I thought I would just hang out. And he says he didn't know that the woman who tried to, he didn't know who Sarah was. And he ends up being released after 3 hours of questioning. When he gets home, a reporter is waiting for him. I think we all have seen I was just listening to a podcast recently. I think it was Bob's podcast, Defense Diaries. He was talking about the murder of Thomas Hunter. He was murdered by this guy, like this medical student resident, who basically like had it out for his dad and stuff like that. Completely innocent 10-year-old child. But when the police scanner kind of announced that there was a murder in this really kind of affluent neighborhood, there were reporters and everybody on scene, like, before even family notifications had gone out. Like, that's how quick it was. So even then, like, we all know that, the media has people listening to these scanners, waiting for kind of breaking news to hit so they can rush and be first on the scene. So this is kind of the same thing that happened. Um, Billy ends up telling the reporter, like, listen, I don't want to be interviewed. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to be left alone. And he says, and they quoted him as saying, I'm a coward. I don't know why I did it. It was the thing to do at the time. And once he's inside his house, he ends up getting more calls from reporters. Um, when the reporters learn that Billy is a former Marine, they start asking questions about his training. And he's like, please don't publish my name, my address, or anything about me. But drop a GIF if you have an idea if they listen to him or not on that. And then I'll go into the chat and let's see. Lovely says, seems like innocent bystanders get it worse for some reason. So very true. It's just like, what's going on? And again, highly recommend listening to the Radiolab podcast to hear kind of what was going on in Sarah's perspective. So do we think that the media honored Billy's request to not publish his name, address, or anything else about him? Drop a GIF in the chat or just answer the question. Sunday, correct. They don't listen. Surprise, surprise. So the day after the assassination attempt, Billy and his image, his name, and everything is all over the news on TV. He is literally on the front page of the news, which is terrifying. He's a reluctant hero, and he hopes that, maybe a better breaking news story will happen and the media will stop focusing on him the next day. But this is a huge thing. Somebody has attempted to assassinate the president, not once, but this is the second time somebody has tried to assassinate the same president. So they keep that story kind of going, and he is just overwhelmed with all the attention. Now, the next day, which is September 24th, a San Francisco Chronicle article written by Herb Caen is published, and it reads in part as follows. Billy Sipple was the center of midnight attention at the Red Lantern, a Golden Gate Avenue bar he favors. The Reverend Ray Brashears, head of Helping Hands, and gay politico Harvey Milk, who claimed to be among Sipple's close friends, described themselves as proud. Maybe this will help break the stereotype. Sipple is among the workers in Milk's campaign for supervisor. Can you just imagine You're not out to anybody but your, like, very close friends in the community that you live in. But this has the potential to be widespread across the country, which means your parents, who likely read the newspaper, are going to see something like this. And now you've essentially been outed. My stomach would literally drop to my toes. I would want to crawl into a hole and hide there forever. And it's just like the most ridiculous thing. And of course, we have to remember when this was happening, right? So there's no consideration for outing people. There's no like awareness, which is just a weird thing to think about. There's no awareness of respecting somebody's, you know, privacy, if you will, especially when it comes to this type of journalism. Madeline put it perfectly. This is the definition of irresponsible journalism. Donnie says he's probably thinking, dang, I should have just let Ford get shot. Yeah, maybe. you know, but it's just like, oh crap. So the day after Herb Cain's article is published, reporters again show up to Billy's place to interview him. And during this meeting, Billy tells reporters that he hasn't heard anything from the president or even the mayor, that he's only actually heard from the press. And before they leave, Billy asks the reporters to not disclose his sexuality. I think we all know, again, that they didn't listen. So multiple national newspapers immediately start reporting on Billy and his sexuality. Unlike Herb's stories, these newspapers do not hint at Billy's sexuality, right? Herb's story didn't out him essentially being like, oh, he's gay. It was basically saying that he is friendly with people who identify as gay. He is friendly with Harvey Milk and he's supporting his campaign for supervisor. But just because you support Harvey Milk doesn't mean that you are also a member of the Alphabet Mafia, right? So at least to Herb's credit, he didn't completely out him and say, hi, here's a flag. Um, these newspapers, these multinational newspapers, don't hint at it. They basically spell it out. Their headlines include things like gay vet and homosexual hero. Could you imagine now seeing something like cringe? Some papers even speculate that President Ford's papers even speculate that President Ford's failure to promptly thank Billy for his heroic act is a result of Billy's sexual orientation. So they're like, oh, well, it makes sense why, President Ford or even the mayor of San Francisco wouldn't reach out to him. It's because he's gay. Like, who wants to be saved by a gay guy? That's essentially what they're saying. And it's just kind of disgusting. Now, many newspapers defend their decision to out Billy as gay. They say that mentioning Billy's sexuality is important because it presents information contrary to the stereotype of homosexuals as lacking vigor, which is something that reporters think that, like, that's what the activists want. They want people to, like, go against the stereotypes. They're not just like, prissy guys or whatever. Like, these are former Marines who will step in the face of danger and stuff like that. Like, very stereotypical mindsets. Now, the newspaper feels like they are raising significant political and social issues by saying, like, let's turn the narrative around. He was saved by a gay man. Like, how amazing. He wasn't scared. He was brave. Not like the rest of the gay men. Like, that's ridiculous to me. Come on. Now, according to Radiolab, the newspapers feel like Billy's sexuality is newsworthy. They value like the value of telling readers that a gay man saved the president outweighs the value of Billy's privacy. That's insane, right? Like, when I read that, I was like, or heard that, I was just like, I still am baffled by all of it. I shouldn't be, but I am. It's ridiculous. So as expected, news of Billy's sexuality ends up making its way to Detroit, where Billy's devout Baptist parents are living. Billy's brother George later tells the Washington Post that seeing the news about their son being gay was an embarrassing blow to their parents. Billy's parents and siblings are hounded and teased about Billy's sexuality, and at work, Billy's father and two of his brothers are taunted and laughed at on the General Motors factory floor. Just days before, the GM employees had been calling Billy a hero and congratulating Billy's father and brothers. At home, Billy's mother is harassed by neighbors and reporters, and Billy's mother tells Billy that she never wants to speak to him again. Billy's father tells his brothers to forget that they even have a brother. That's really sad. I think even as a parent, I don't get that mindset for myself. Like, I plan to just accept a human being as they are. Um, I don't I don't get being, like, caring about, like, the wide public perception over, like, how does that supersede your love for your kid? Like, maybe that's more of a, like, really in-depth question, but I don't get it, 'cause it's if you're just like, as a parent, right, like, you're supposed to love your kid unconditionally, like, granted, right, like, the John Wayne Gacy's of the world, the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, the Albert Fishes of the world, like, sure, I'm sure their parents still love them. Well, maybe not Dahmers, but I'm sure their parents still love them, right? But do they, like, agree with their ex? No. But you see, like, Jeff's dad stayed the course with him. Uh, John Wayne Gacy's mom stayed the course with him despite the things that their children did. They still kind of supported them in a way, and it's really, really strange to me that your your love isn't actually unconditional or isn't actually, as deep or unwavering as you claim it to be, right? I don't get the correlation between those things, and maybe I'm not saying it correctly, but, like, being embarrassed over my child's sexuality would never, like, supersede my love for them. I would never be like, "Oh my god, I was so embarrassed, I can't love you anymore, please don't ever speak to me again." Such a strange thing to do. Because of this, kind of kicking him out of the family, essentially, Billy's parents and his siblings never fully accept him back into the family. When his mom dies, Billy's dad doesn't let him attend the funeral, which to me is just like ridiculous. Let's go into the chat. Let's see. Madeline says, I went to journalism school, and this is a common mentality of many journalists. The subject of the story only matters to them as a tool to use to get their point across. They could care less about the actual person, but more about what they symbolize. So true. And we see that today, too, even within true crime, right? And why we're kind of pushing, especially like at the True Crime Podcast Festival and kind of how I interact with true crime. It's like the ethical consumption and the delivery of the true crime, right? Of the stories of cases and involving the family members, etc. So, I get the sensationalism behind it 100%. This is something we're also gonna be talking about at the Moment House, event that's coming out on the 14th. We are gonna be talking about that. We're gonna have Sarah Turney there, who is a huge advocate for ethical true crime and kind of what that means. She's incredible. So Sunday says, "That's heartbreaking." Agree. Donnie says, "I'm sorry, how many of your family members saved a US president?" is what I would have said. Right. Exactly. Like, who cares? But that's the other thing is, like, how can this heroic thing, even unintentional heroicism, right? Like, how could that supersede like, how does being gay completely erase that, right? Like, you could have saved, like, a house full of kids from a fire and be like, "Oh, you were gay, sorry." No, it doesn't matter anymore. You're no longer a hero. So strange. Such a weird mentality. And unfortunately, we know that people still operate in that mentality, but hopefully, in the next 100 years, that changes. On September 25th, Billy and his attorney end up holding a press conference where Billy says, "My sexual orientation has nothing at all to do with saving the president's life, just as the color of my eyes or my race has nothing to do what happened in front of the St. Francis Hotel on Tuesday. My sexuality is a part of my private life and has no bearing on my response to the act of a person seeking to take the life of another. I am first and foremost a human being who enjoys and respects life. I feel that a person's worth is determined by how he or she responds to the world in which they live, not on how or what or with whom a private life is shared." Like, snaps to that, right? So they want to break chains now. Whatever they want to break us, whenever they want to break a story first, who's breaking when they first see the same dialogue when the first 10. Correct. Agreed. So when asked what he would like to see happen now, Billy says, "I don't know. I'm very shook up. I may even have to go see a doctor over this. I'm very emotionally shook up and I'm feeling very sorry for my family too. It's awful, just awful. I've got nothing more to say." So the next day, President Ford writes a letter to Billy, which is publicly released. And in that letter, Ford writes, I want you to know how much I appreciated your selfless actions last Monday. The events were a shock to us all, but you acted quickly and without fear for your own safety. By doing so, you helped to avert danger to me and to others in the crowd. You have my heartfelt appreciation. Which I'm like, okay, came a little too late, right? Like, I would be thinking this guy immediately. What's going on, Mr. Ford? What's happening? Why didn't you tell him? But whatever. So on the 30th, Billy ends up writing a letter back to President Ford where he says the stories about his sexuality have caused great anguish to my parents and to the rest of my family. Billy tells Ford that it's a very hard thing to have your mother and family not want to have any contact with you, and asks Ford to take the time to see my family or at least call my family. He says, I love my family and I do not want to be separated from their love and companionship. Your help would be greatly appreciated. Do we think that Gerald Ford called his parents or ever publicly thanked him, invited him to the White House, as Madeline says? Again, GIF comment. Let's see. I'm going to put mine in there too, because I'll use my favorite Martin GIF. The answer is hell no. He did not. So we have absolutely no evidence whatsoever that President Gerald Ford ever makes a call on Billy's behalf to his parents to even say, like, listen, I can't step into your, like family business, but I want you to know that I appreciate the acts of your son. Even if he disagreed, which is stupid, with Billy's lifestyle, or like literal natural choice of life, not even a choice. I don't say that. Like, it's just who he is as a person. If he disagrees fundamentally with like the alphabet mafia, by making that call, he's not agreeing to, supporting it or anything like that. He's truly just going and saying, like, listen, I appreciate your son. Like, you did something right by making sure your son was willing to step up and do something to help another person. And he couldn't even do that. Didn't do that by all accounts, from my understanding. And I'm sure that not Gerald's brother, Billy's brother would have at least said, like, yeah, and we even got a call from Ford, and that didn't change our parents' mind. But nothing like that happened. And more notably, right, this is why that Ford wrote back to Billy, or wrote to Billy initially, was just a PR thing. I don't honestly think that it was a heartfelt, like, thanks for saving my life, I could have died kind of situation. Again, because the fact that Billy was gay supersedes the act that he did by actually saving Ford's life, which is, again, stupid. He also doesn't ever publicly thank Billy or shake his hand, which leaves Billy feeling bitter and disappointed. Yes. So Donnie says that, I mean, it would have been nice, but asking him to contact his family isn't the president's responsibility. Correct. And an invite to the White House would have been a fair thing to do. Yes, but I would also challenge that again with the point of, you're not contacting them to say, like, hey, mend relationships. You're just contacting them to say, like, listen, I appreciate what your son did. Past presidents have done that in the past. They've contacted the family to say, like, oh, hey, great. They've invited them to the White House. They've invited, like, if this would have gone in a different way, ideally what would have happened is that Billy and his family would have been invited to the White House for like a celebration of like a hero, blah blah blah. But because he was gay, that's all kind of thrown out the window, which is ridiculous. If this would have never happened in terms of Billy being outed by the press intentionally, I think he would have gotten the hero's thank you that he deserved, right? So because of all of this hoopla that's around Billy's life, he ends up filing a $15 million lawsuit against 7 newspapers, accusing them of invading his privacy. And Billy says that as a consequence of the newspapers outing him, his family found out that he was gay and then abandoned him. The newspapers also exposed Billy to contempt and ridicule, causing him great mental anguish, embarrassment, and humiliation. So in 1984, the lawsuit is dismissed by the California Supreme Court on the basis that Billy's sexual orientation had been known by hundreds of people prior to the news accounts. And as time goes on, Billy's health deteriorates. He ends up drinking more and more heavily. We see this a lot with, unfortunately, veterans who have come back. We don't really take care of our veterans now. We didn't then. Um, and so when they're dealing with these crises in mental health, they're self-medicating, right? They're either doing that through drugs or through alcohol. Um, and there's kind of an underlying mental health issue with Billy here too, because he's drinking more and more heavily. He also starts receiving treatment for schizophrenia, alcoholism, and other health issues, including hypertension and heart problems. Um, it's obvious to those around Billy that he is struggling. There's numerous times that Billy gets drunk and says that he wishes he had never saved the president's life because his life would have been so much more simpler. He probably would have been happier if he hadn't done that. And on February 2nd, 1989, Billy's friend, Wayne Friday, is asked to do a welfare check on Billy because he hasn't been seen or heard from in quite a while. Wayne goes to Billy's place and rings a bell over and over again, but he doesn't receive an answer. And Wayne calls Billy's landlord to let him in. And as soon as Wayne opens the door, he can tell by the smell that Billy is dead and he has been for some time. Billy is sitting in a chair with a bottle of Jack Daniels nearby, with the TV still on, and he was only 47 years old. That's so sad and unfortunate. So, following Billy's death, President Ford writes a letter to Billy's friends and family that reads in part, I strongly regretted the problems that developed for him following this incident. It saddened me to learn the circumstances of his death. Miss Ford and I express our deepest sympathy in this time of sorrow involving your friend's passing. Billy is buried at the Golden Gate National Cemetery. However, this is not the end of Billy's story. Even today, people continue to talk about Billy and his heroism. Also, multiple law review articles and more than a dozen books and commentary pieces have been mentioned or have mentioned the ethical implications of newspapers adding Billy against his will. Insane in the membrane. What did we think about that one? This one's a little bit short, honestly, you guys, because I'm getting ready for California, so this one I pulled out of my pocket. But we also have time now to talk about the Jen Shaw thing. But I do want to get people's feelings and thoughts on this. If you want to come up on the speaker request, you can click on that button and we can talk about kind of your thought process and kind of what you were going through when you were listening to me tell you Billy's case. Um, how many of you guys know who Jen Shaw is from The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City? She's Shaw-mazing, but not so much anymore. And also, I'm a huge, like, Bravo fan, like, ridiculous. Let's see, Lovely says or sorry, Madeline, we'll start with you. You said, "Well, also Billy went out of his way to save his life, so the least Ford could do as a person, not the president, sign a letter someone else wrote for him anyway." True dat. Doubting himself, Lovely Key says, words hurt and hold power, more powerful than his instincts. Um, Sunday Garcia said, sorry, I'm just listening to this today. No problem. So, we I'm a huge fan of Bravo TV. I am a reality TV junkie. I think I've talked about that several times. So I have been aware and following the Jen Shaw case, since the inception of when these things were starting to play out. Lovely made a mention at the beginning of the chat or the convo that, I don't and I share the same kind of bafflement. I don't understand why these people who are engaging in these, like, fraudulent activities, right? Like, Jen Shaw, at the end of this, has to forfeit $6.5 million dollars now. And then when she's out of prison, because she definitely is going to be going to prison, when she's out of prison, she's also going to have to pay upwards of $9.5 million dollars. Like, hello? Are you kidding me? Why would you go on a national platform showcase your wealth and opulence when you fraudulently stole this from 55-year-old people, like over 55-year-old people, like senior communities. You took advantage. This is like a Bernie Madoff kind of thing. Um, like I don't feel bad for Bernie Madoff whatsoever, or any of the Madoff family, or anybody who supported him in his, you know, greed essentially. But very, very I don't understand the mentality of that. That has to be like a narcissism thing. Like that truly has to be something that like you just don't believe you've done anything, and so you will put yourself in this position to essentially, like, have dirt drug up on you, and you can be like, "Oh, no, that never happened. Oh, no, this." We saw that with Teresa Giudice. She's from the Real Housewives of New Jersey when her husband Joe committed all of these, like, frauds that ended up getting him deported back to Italy. Now he's living in freaking Jamaica or whatever, but it caused Teresa, because she was also signing documents, even though she says that Joe forged her signature on those, she was also signing documents, and it caused her to go to prison, and she missed out on her kids' lives. It's just kind of ridiculous. Okay, so Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is a great franchise to watch because the level of delusion is just amazing. I highly recommend watching it. Jen Shaw is like nobody else that I've ever witnessed on there. So here are um, the charges against Jen Shaw. So she was arrested, and the arrest was featured on the last season. Like she's federal court. Like this is not a joke or a game, right? This isn't like, oh, Salt Lake City police arrested me. This is like the FBI. This is the federal government. There's no parole here. There's no like I think they have good time credit. So like if you serve time and you're good during your prison stint, um you can get out early, but there's no, like, probation, nothing like that. So she for sure is going to be getting some jail time. Um, she was booked on a conspiracy to commit wire fraud in connection with telemarketing and conspiracy to commit money laundering. It was her and her assistant. Now, here's the thing. So she during the first and second season was like, this guy's name is Stuart. I call him Stuart Little just because it's how I remember his name. So she calls him, his name is Stuart, and she's like, "Stuart's my best friend, my business partner." First season, right? First, blah, best friend, business partner, etc. Like, amazing guy. He's so wonderful. Second season, he's my assistant, business partner, best friend. But then when these charges are levied, she's like, yeah, he's just my employee. Like, we're not best friends. We don't really know each other like that. It's a complete flip, right? Kind of trying to distance herself when she forgets that this has been immortalized on film. Um, Donnie, to answer your question, not all of them are Mormons. Most of them are former Mormons. Heather Gay is probably my favorite former Mormon on the Housewives of Salt Lake City. Anyways, she's hilarious. Um, so it's her and her assistant, right? They end up facing a maximum sentence of 30 years for the wire fraud and an additional 20 years for the money laundering charges. Now, the crazy thing is like you're thinking, okay, there's no way that Stuart's gonna fold. Oh my gosh, he folds like a friggin' towel. I don't know what the phrase is. It's like they folded like a somebody tell me what that is. I don't know. But he basically folded. And he threw Jen under the bus. He was like, "Let me go drive this bus up here real quick and throw Jen under it." So, I mean, he also has a family, all this stuff. Like he has a lot to lose in this too. And ew, gosh. Okay, there's so much here. So, Stuart ends up folding and is like, "Yep, I'm guilty. Tell me how you'd like me to participate in the case against Jen." So, when that happened, when I saw that Stuart had basically copped to being guilty in this scheme, I was like, "Oh gosh, I don't know how she's planning on fighting this or how she's thinking this is going to not implicate her in any way." She bragged the first season about how close they were, how, they were business partners, blah, 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 blah. Like, you can't just be like, "I had no idea this was happening." You run these companies. She couldn't even explain on the reunion how this company of hers worked, right? People were like, "We don't even know what you do." And that's a trend in the housewives who are conducting very shady businesses that they aren't willing to disclose, like, what they do, what their company does, how that process works. Jen Shaw was an example of this. Now, the weird thing is that Jen is married to um, a man that we call Coach Shaw because he is a basketball coach, I think, for a college. And he's on the road all the time, but he is I think he practices the Muslim faith, and he is just a good, like, he's like a steady Eddie, like Jen is like erratic and like all over the place in terms of like her emotions. She's like getting in fights with people. She's threatening to drown people in a backyard lake and stuff like that. Like she's just ridiculous, like very high emotions. Coach Shaw is the opposite. He's just so chill, so steady, and he's like, "Girl, let it go. Everything's fine. Don't worry about this," right? So this last season, when all of these charges are levied against her, she's playing the victim in this and being like, "I have no idea why I've been targeted. I don't know why they're saying I did this. I did not do this." She said she said the only thing she's guilty of is being Shaw amazing. And she like vigorously on all platforms, live television, defended herself and said, "I'm not guilty of this. Like, you just wait. We're going to go to court." Here's the worst thing about this, right? So Jen was the moneymaker. She was the breadwinner. Um, at least that's what it made it seem like. I don't think Coach Shaw is bringing in, like, hundreds of $1,000,000. They're living in a rented, I suppose, chalet in Salt Lake City. Like, I mean, when I tell you the opulence that she, like, displayed on which is, par for the course with Real Housewives, um, it was all over the place, paying for her best friend, not even her best friend, just paying for a friend's birthday party, and it was like $50,000. Never in my life, as much as I love my friends, and if I was rich as heck, never in my life would I throw you a $50,000 birthday party, because that party is essentially for me. Like, I'm just saying it's for you, just like Jen did, but that party really is for me. So, I would never in my life do something like that. But she was just like, "Didn't do it, not guilty. You just wait. We'll have our chance in court." And she, unfortunately, thoughts and prayers to her, had to downsize her home from the chalet to, like, a smaller home, and she was even being picky about that. I'm like, "Listen, I would live in a one-bedroom apartment, okay, if this prevented me from going to federal prison." Um, the other thing is that she took her mom's retirement money to pay for her defense counsel, and to me, that's just like, ugh, gross. Like, does anybody else get a gross feeling about that? Because, like, I get your parents wanting to help you. My mom is the complete opposite. Like, she would help me 100%, but she has, like, no retirement to pull from because she was just never kind of brought up to save and things like that. So I live with the reality that I'm going to have to support my parent, when they retire or age out of work. I don't freaking know what the word is. Which is also, like, why I want to open, like, small businesses and stuff like that to be able to give my mom kind of that passive income so I don't actually, like, actively support her. She's, like, helping with the business, so then she gets paid like that. Like a legitimate business, not like this telemarketing scheme that Jen Shaw has. But I thought it was so gross that she was like, "I even took money from my mom," like, that's how much, like, now knowing that she's pled guilty, right, it pisses me off because I'm like, who are you trying to convince? Because you just took your mom's retirement savings. You have to forfeit $6.5 million that was stolen anyway. I don't know how much of that was actually hers, comparatively speaking to, like, whatever legitimate business practices she had. I don't think she had any. And then 9.5 when she's out. She's never gonna at least my assumption is that she will never be able to pay her mother back for that. So then what is her mom going to do? It grosses me out, and it's just like, you're so delusional or you're so just, like, such a narcissist. I hate throwing that term around, but that's really what it feels like because it's like, you've done this thing, right? Like, you end up pleading guilty to it. You know that what you did, A, was wrong. You know that there really isn't a defense for it, and you're just, like, playing up the media, playing up on TV and on social media that you're gonna fight this, you're gonna go to trial, and you just can't wait, innocent until proven guilty, blah, 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 blah. And then you end up copping to it and are like, "Yeah, I knew what I was doing was wrong. Yeah, I knew I was defrauding people and taking their money and taking their savings and leaving them without nothing." So she essentially did the same thing to her mom. Like, she has no, to me, conscience with that if she was able to do it to complete random strangers who are vulnerable adults, um, and to do it to her own mom. It's just kind of crazy. Um I don't think her family lives with her. I don't know, like, from the Salt Lake City perspective, like, in terms of, like, her home life, we know she has, her sons, which is also really unfortunate because she's going to be away from them from an extended period of time. Um, I don't know what that marriage piece looks like between her and Coach. Um, and then, of course, her family, like, she supports her family. She's employed her family, so she's essentially implicated them in some way by help making them defraud other people, either intentionally or unintentionally, and then she's done the same to her mom, which is just ridiculous. So she ends up going to her first court appearance on March 30th, 2021, and the judge sets the conditions that she can't commit any federal offenses when she's released. She has to appear as required by law, anytime there's a court hearing. She can't travel outside of Utah with the exception to go to New York because that's where the district, I guess, court is for whatever the issue is. So she can only go to New York City. She can't travel internationally, and she can't have any contacts with her co-defendants or engage in telemarketing. Um, they end up leaving that courtroom and going back to Utah, but then she spends so much of the time on the reunion show just, like, proclaiming her innocence. Um, she was supposed to be arraigned virtually, but, they postponed it to April because she couldn't figure out, the Zoom. So she calls into the hearing in April. She pleads not guilty to the count of conspiracy, and the count to money laundering. And she ends up hiring Clayton Sims, who is a local lawyer in Utah who defends like white collar crime criminals, and then an attorney who's out in Washington, D.C. And that's part of where she spent her mom's retirement money is for those retainer fees, etc. They gave her a bail of $1 million, and they gave her a like 1 week to pay $250,000 to basically secure the brand. So, I don't know if you guys know how bail works. I have unfortunately had to bail many of my family members out of jail. Um, but basically, like, say she had $1 million, she basically would have to pay half of that in order to, like, use a bond agency, etcetera, put things up, like her house or whatever, like, different property. So, typically, like, for instance, my brother's bail would be, like, $1,500, so I'd only have to pay, like, half of that to be able to get him out. And then I would say, like, "Yes, I'm the person responsible for ensuring this person returns to court," which never in my life. I've never actually bailed, like, my real brother out because, um I was of the mentality that, like, "You're there, chill out." But that's just me. Um, but I have had to do it for other people. One time, you guys, crazy story. So, let me tell you this crazy story, and it maybe just speaks to, like, how much of a fool I am, I don't freaking know. I'm willing to own up to that piece. So, I'm really like ingrained in the indie podcasting community. And I have a lot of like podcaster friends. Some of them don't have like the best home life or they don't enter the best relationships. So there was one person I had met and everything, and they were from out of the country and they were staying with somebody who was local to me in Dallas. And that person ended up getting arrested. And I paid I paid for his bail for to get him out of jail because I really cared about her. I still do. I love her to death. Um, Cared about her and I was like so worried. I forgot like what the issue was. This was years and years ago, like well over 6 years ago. But I paid for his bail and then turns out like he was just like a piece of crap of a human being. Definitely some issues of like intimate partner violence there. So I was kind of like regretting that I had paid for it. I didn't know obviously that that was happening and if I did I probably wouldn't have offered it, but still, it's just, like, crazy. Bail is very strange. Um, Anywho, so they end up seizing her assets, all this stuff. She's still, like, all over instant 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 media. She's all over, like, social media just, like, proclaiming her innocence, etcetera. So, initially, Stewart pleads not guilty, right? But when he decides to fold on Jen, he goes in and pleads guilty to 3 counts, which was crazy. 3 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice, and admitting to hiding the ownership and money, defrauding elderly people, and lying to the Federal Trade Commission in a deposition, which constituted perjury. Um, he faces a maximum of 30 years. So this was supposed to this was supposed to come to trial, right? Because Jen was over here saying like, "Yes, I'm gonna go to trial. I'm going to pr prove that I'm innocent." And so when she went in, to the court this past week, everybody was like, "Well, wonder what's going to happen." So there was this huge shock across, like, Twitter community, Bravo community, that she had walked in, was sworn in to plead guilty to the first count of her criminal indictment in connection with that telemarketing fraud scheme, which essentially meant she preyed on the elderly. They, I think that the prosecutors had been working on this plea with her for some time. I don't think that this was just kind of randomly and they're like, oh, I think that her and her lawyers were trying to find the best plea that would work for her, to give her the least amount of time. So she ends up changing her plea from not guilty to guilty, and because they got her, plea, they end up dropping the money laundering, um, count, and so all she has is the wire fraud thing. So in court, she had to acknowledge that she had to acknowledge basically that she knew what she was doing was wrong. She knew that she intentionally hid her business. So she was in New York and then she moved her business entity to Kosovo. Sorry, to Kosovo so she could basically like skirt kind of any commissions or overseeing anything. Um and I think that there was a lot of shock across the community because she was just like so adamant that she was not guilty. And she accepted the plea saying that she would have 168 she wouldn't appeal the verdict if the sentence was 168 months or less, so 14 years or less. Um, Again, she has to forfeit 6.5 or 6 million in assets that she has already, like everything that they seized totaled to 6 million. So all of that she forfeits and agrees not to contest. And then she has to pay a restitution of at least $9.5 million. Um, I can't imagine what her co-stars are thinking because the two of them were with her. Maybe they knew about it, but yeah, she still faces even though the 14 years, I mean, 14 years is huge. And so they released a statement saying, like, she accepts full responsibility now for her actions and deeply apologized to all who have been harmed. Ms. Shaw is also sorry for disappointing her husband, children, family, friends, and supporters. Jen pled guilty because she wants to pay her debt to society and put this ordeal behind her and her family. Um, isn't that just insane? So that's basically, like, everybody was, like, so shocked because she was like, "The only thing I'm guilty of is being Shaw-mazing." And I would if I was her husband, like, if I was her partner, I would be pissed, dude, because, like, Coach Shaw is so busy. I can't imagine that he was actually, like, in the know of this. Like, I could do things and my husband would have no idea. He just knows that, like, I make money off of these extracurricular things I do, right? Like, I make money off of my voiceovers, but I could be money laundering and he would have 0 clue. He's just like, "Cool, that goes into our family funds," or "This goes to this," you know? Um, so in my heart of hearts, I wanna believe that Coach Shaw had no idea about what was going on, but you never know. But yeah. Okay, so that was that on the Jen Shaw thing. I really wish that, like, Charlie from Crime Lines would have joined us because we'll have this little group chat going on about, like, Bravo and all these crazy things. So, yeah, I think it's just really despicable. The biggest thing, like, yes, she defrauded all of these people, right? And thankfully or hopefully, they'll be getting a lot of their money back. So the way that this scheme worked is that she was working with other, like, co-participants in this scheme, and they were selling, like, business service, like, "Oh, if you buy, like, this business from us, it makes money, like, passive income, you don't have to worry about it." And so Jen's part of the, scheme was to go and upsell business services, like, "Oh, if you go this, you'll for sure be successful in your business, and you'll make lots of money." And so they're like, "Oh, that's wonderful, that's great." And then they would end up, paying this ridiculous amount of money to potentially make more or to get their money back. And then that never happened, which is how it got to the FTC. So, very intricate, kind of sad thing that happened. Um, but yeah, I'm interested to see her sentencing. It was really sad to read the transcript because they're like talking about when they're going to schedule the sentencing hearing. And so they were like, yeah, let's do it on this. Oh, let's do it 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Like, imagine you get your sentencing to prison 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. No, so it's going to be on November 28th of when she's going to be sentenced. And so the judge told her it could be 14 years, could be less. I think that she will likely get somewhere in the middle, 7 to 10 years. I don't think that she will get a lot, and I think she'll be out in 3. I would not be surprised, or I would be surprised if she got the full 14. I think she'll be out in 3. I would be shocked if she got less than 7 years, to be honest with you. But that's just me. Somehow these people still find luck in those places. Now, next week, we have a very special guest as I wrap this up for you guys. Next week, we have Bob Mata on. He is the host of the Defense Diaries podcast. You probably have heard me talk about him because you know that I like to say that his dad, because this is true, his dad was John Wayne Gacy's defense attorney. And he was also a defense attorney, or Bob was, for a really interesting case that we'll talk about probably later. But Bob's going to come on to talk about the Stephen Avery case and all of the crazy crap that happened in that case. It's going to be a really, really great discussion. Then the week after that, we're going to have a forensic psychologist on to talk about kind of the differences between psychopathy, sociopathy, and the fact that we don't really use sociopathy anymore as a term. And then kind of talk about like how the media kind of perpetuates this, the use of those terms and everything, and often gets them wrong. So if you are interested in kind of like the forensic psychology behind true crime and wanting to know more, on the 26th is when we're going to have Dr. Merck on. So I highly recommend joining us for that one, having your questions ready to go. And then we should be good to go after that. Whoever wants to come on, come on. I'm going to try to have more collaborators on so we can have kind of more of an engaging discussion. Thank you for always listening to me talk. I appreciate it. But sometimes I like to have conversations with my friends too and bring on very interesting people. So if there's anybody you would like to have on the show or you think would be a good fit, just let me know and I will reach out to them and have them on. Or you can tag me in social media and say, hey, Lainey, get these people in here. But anyways, that wraps up our show for tonight. I appreciate you, as always, joining me every Tuesday night for True Crime Convos, 6 p.m. on Spotify Live and then on our other streaming platforms. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. I appreciate you as always, and we will talk next time, next week, with Bob Mata joining us to talk about the Stephen Avery case. Okay, friends, bye. Have a good night.